A solitary alarm shatters the silence of a lunar observatory. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who prefers the company of data to people, stares at his terminal as a priority alert floods the screen. It displays an impossible data stream, a structured signal from an empty void between galaxies, a pattern that defies every law of astrophysics. This is not random cosmic noise. He whispers into the stillness of his lab, a sentence that will change everything. This is not just noise, it is a message. By the end of this story, you will witness the moment humanity's lonely existence in the cosmos came to a stunning end. We will uncover who sent this dark signal from the other side of the universe, and why its message was meant for us. What would you do if the silence of space suddenly spoke back? His fingers flew across the console, a frantic dance of denial and dread. Aris isolated the signal, routing it through every deep space sensor array at his disposal. The lunar observatory, the orbital telescopes around Mars, the silent listening posts drifting in the Kuiper belt. Each one echoed back the same impossible data. The signal was real. It was not a glitch, not a solar flare, not a piece of errant human technology. It was coming from the void, a point of origin so profoundly empty it should have been silent for all of eternity. A chime cut through his focus, and the grim, determined face of Commander Eva Rostova materialized on a secure comms window. Her voice was a low, tense whisper, as if speaking too loudly might alert the universe to their secret. Aris, if this is real, it is the discovery of the millennium. But who or what is on the other end? Her question hung in the air, a challenge that stripped the event of its scientific wonder and replaced it with a chilling, personal weight. This was no longer just data. It was a message sent by someone. Aris turned back to his screen where a new layer of analysis was completing. The signal's core structure was not just ordered noise. It was a cascade of mathematical perfection, a sequence of prime numbers so long and complex it could not occur by chance. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, continuing on into the millions, a numerical signature screaming intelligence. This was a deliberate, engineered handshake from the darkness, a first principle of communication meant to be understood by any mind that knew math. The silence of the cosmos had not just been broken. It had introduced itself. The cascade of prime numbers was a declaration of intent, but the unified space command demanded proof of a sender. Aris stood before the Council's holodisplay, the ghostly faces of Earth's most powerful military and scientific leaders staring back at him. He laid out the data, the impossible origin point, the mathematical purity of the signal. Admiral Vance, a man whose face was a roadmap of old conflicts, leaned forward, his voice a low rumble of pure skepticism. Dr. Thorne, the universe is full of echoes and anomalies. This could be an elaborate hoax, a piece of corporate sabotage, or a deep space phenomenon we simply do not yet understand. To risk an interstellar incident or worse, on a pattern in the noise is the height of recklessness. The room felt heavy, the weight of institutional doubt pressing down, threatening to bury the greatest discovery in human history under a mountain of procedure and fear. Then a junior analyst, her voice trembling slightly, spoke from the periphery. "Sir, if I may." She pushed a new data stream to the main display. "I've been analyzing the carrier wave, the energy that's carrying the mathematical sequence. It isn't clean. It's been artificially modulated." She zoomed in on a spectral analysis, pointing to rhythmic, subtle fluctuations embedded within the power of the signal itself. "It's like a whisper underneath a shout," she explained. "Natural cosmic events do not produce energy signatures with this kind of layered, deliberate structure." This was not just a message written in mathematics. The very medium carrying the message was also engineered. The silence in the command chamber was absolute. Admiral Vance's stern expression did not soften, but his eyes narrowed, calculating. He saw the same thing Aris did. This was no echo. It was a manufactured artifact, a product of technology. The risk of ignoring it now outweighed the risk of investigation. "Very well," the Admiral said, his voice devoid of all previous doubt. "Operation Silent Reach is authorized." A single stealth-class probe dispatched on a one-way mission to the source. This sets a precedent, people. We are no longer just listening, we are answering. And we have no idea what, out there in that infinite dark, might answer back. The Odyssey was a needle of polished obsidian and cold fusion fire, a ship built for silence and speed. Its mission was the best-kept secret on Earth, known only to a handful of people in a sealed room deep beneath Geneva. Aris and Eva stood in the vessel's empty command nexus, the soft glow of dormant systems painting their faces in pale blue light. They were the mission's heart and its fist, a scientist and a soldier bound together by an impossible signal. But a message required a translator. Their search led them to a cluttered university office smelling of old books and stronger coffee, where Dr. Lena Petrova regarded them with the weary skepticism of someone who had decoded too many human lies to believe easily in alien truths. When Eva laid out the parameters of the signal, Lena leaned back in her chair, a dry, humorless smile touching her lips. "You want me to decode a message from God?" she asked, her voice a low, rasping murmur. "Let's hope they're friendly." It was not a prayer, but a warning. Her cynicism was a necessary counterweight to their desperate hope, a shield against the profound disappointment or danger that might await them. Back aboard the Odyssey, the final preparations were a study in controlled chaos. Engineers conducted systems checks while the small, hand-picked crew familiarized themselves with the labyrinthine corridors and the humming pulse of the ship's experimental engines. Each of them carried the weight of the unknown, their personal fears carefully buried beneath a layer of professional determination. They were not explorers setting out with flags and fanfare. They were a whisper sent into a deafening silence, a single question aimed at a void that had just spoken. As the final airlock sealed with a resonant thud, the only sound was the low, steady hum of the ship coming to life, a mechanical heartbeat preparing to carry them beyond the edge of every map. The Odyssey slipped its lunar moorings with a silence that felt profound. There was no roar of engines, only the faintest vibration through the deck plates as the ship pushed away from the pale, cratered surface of humanity's outpost. On the main view screen, Earth shrank with a terrifying swiftness, a brilliant blue and white marble against the endless black. Aris watched it recede, his reflection a ghost over the image of his homeworld. He muttered under his breath, the words meant only for himself, yet they seemed to echo in the quiet bridge. "We are either the first to make contact or the first to walk into a trap." Eva, standing at her command station, did not turn, but her grip on the console tightened almost imperceptibly. The moment stretched, filled with the weight of that single, unanswerable thought. Then, the ship's artificial intelligence, its voice calm and genderless, broke the silence. "All systems are nominal, initiating faster than light transit in 3, 2, 1. The star field on the view screen did not blur. It simply changed. The familiar constellations vanished, replaced by a tunnel of streaking, impossible light. A silent, violent river of energy carrying them forward. The sensation was not of speed, but of the universe itself folding around them, of space and time becoming fluid. They were no longer traveling through the void. They were being hurled across it, a single thought aimed at the heart of an enigma. The journey had truly begun, a leap of faith into a conversation started by a voice from the dark. The violent calm of faster-than-light travel settled into a strange new routine aboard the Odyssey. Days blurred into a cycle of system checks and anxious waiting, the ship a self-contained world hurtling toward a single point of impossible data. In the heart of the vessel, sealed in a soundproofed lab, Dr. Lena Petrova waged a silent war against the signal. Her workspace was a constellation of holographic schematics and cascading data streams, the original transmission pulsing at the center like a digital heart. She ignored the crew, the food replicators, even the artificial day-night cycle. Her entire world narrowed to the pattern. It was a puzzle, and she was a woman who could not abide an unsolved puzzle. Her fingers, stained with old ink, danced across the interface, isolating, filtering, and discarding layers of the signal's complex structure. She was searching for a key, a Rosetta Stone hidden in the noise. And then she found it. Buried within the endless cascade of prime numbers was a smaller, repeating segment, a rhythmic pulse that had been overshadowed by the mathematical fireworks. She isolated it, amplified it, and watched as the raw data resolved on her main display. It was a perfect circle, a flawless, unbroken geometric shape rendered in pure information. There were no words, no equations, just this most fundamental form. Lena sat back, the fatigue falling away from her face, replaced by a look of profound understanding. She opened a channel to the entire crew, her voice, usually so cynical, now filled with a quiet awe. "It is a foundational concept," she announced, "a circle. The most universal shape, a constant across any conceivable geometry or physics. This is not the message itself. It is a greeting, or perhaps a warning." They are establishing common ground. On the bridge, Aris and Eva watched the simple shape rotate slowly on the main viewer. The stakes of their mission crystallized in that moment. This was not a random broadcast, a cosmic scream lost to the void. The senders were not just shouting into the darkness. They had crafted a signal meant to be understood, starting with the simplest of ideas to build a bridge across an unimaginable gulf. They were patiently, intelligently waiting for a response. The silence from the Odyssey's crew was not one of confusion, but of realization. They were no longer just listeners. They were now participants in a conversation that had already begun. The perfect circle on the main viewer flickered, its smooth lines distorting for a single, jarring second. Aris frowned, dismissing it as a glitch in the display system. But then the low, ambient hum of the Odyssey's life support stuttered, the lights dimming to a dull orange before surging back to full brightness. An alarm chimed, not the urgent blare of a hull breach, but the softer, more insistent tone of a critical system anomaly. Eva was on her feet in an instant, her fingers flying across her command console. "Life signs," she ordered, her voice cutting through the sudden tension on the bridge. "I am reading one additional biosignature. It is fluctuating. Origin point, Cargo Bay 4. The air in the cargo bay was frigid, smelling of ozone and something else, something sharp and organic. Their weapons drawn, Eva and two security officers moved through the canyon of sealed storage containers, their boots echoing on the metal deck. In a narrow aisle between crates of nutrient paste, they found it. The creature was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was roughly the size of a large dog, its body a seamless fusion of dark, chitinous plating and pulsing, bioluminescent veins. It had no discernible head, only a cluster of shimmering, lens-like organs that swiveled to track their approach. It was clearly alive, and just as clearly it was built. Wires snaked from its body into the ship's day, a port on the wall, a parasitic tether. Before anyone could move, the creature shuddered. A high-pitched whine emanated from its core, and the bioluminescent veins flared into a blinding white light. The lenses focused on Eva, and for a fleeting moment, a complex data stream, a compressed burst of coordinates and ship identifiers flashed across their surfaces. Then, with a sound like cracking glass, the creature collapsed in on itself, its body dissolving into a smoking, black slurry that ate into the deck plating. The connection to the data port severed. Eva holstered her weapon, her face a mask of cold fury as she stared at the corrosive remains. She tapped her comm, her voice a low, dangerous snarl that carried to every corner of the ship. "We have a leak. The race for this signal just went hot. Our lead is gone. Someone on Earth just declared this a competition, and they are willing to sabotage an interstellar mission to win. We are no longer just explorers. We are prey." The acrid stench of the creatures remained still hung in the air when the Odyssey shuddered violently. A low, grinding groan echoed from deep within the ship's superstructure, followed by the shrill scream of a primary system failure alarm. The tunnel of streaking light on the main viewer flickered and dissolved, dumping them back into the mundane star-dusted black of normal space. The artificial gravity wavered, sending a loose data pad clattering to the deck. Eva gripped her command chair, her knuckles white. "We have lost primary navigation," she barked, her voice tight. "We are dead in the water." Engineer Ben Carter was already tearing open an access panel in the corridor outside the bridge, his hands moving with a frantic, practiced speed. The air around the module was thick with the smell of scorched circuitry and melted polymer. He pulled a blackened component from its housing, holding it up to the harsh emergency lights. His face, usually calm and focused, was a grim mask of cold fury. "This was not an accident," he announced, his voice carrying a tremor of rage. "The fail-safes were deliberately bypassed. The overload was engineered. Someone on this ship does not want us to reach the source." His words landed in the tense silence like a physical blow. The fragile camaraderie of the mission shattered in an instant. Suspicious glances darted between the small crew. The security officers who had been with Eva in the cargo bay now eyed the scientists with open distrust. The scientists, in turn, shrank back from the military personnel. The shared purpose that had bound them together was now replaced by a chilling, pervasive fear. The enemy was no longer an abstract concept out in the void. The enemy was here, standing beside them, sharing their meals, breathing their air. Aris stepped into the center of the brewing storm on the bridge, his hands raised in a placating gesture that felt desperately inadequate. His voice was soft, but it cut through the angry murmurs. "Listen to me, all of you. This is exactly what they want. Whether it is a rival corporation or some rogue faction back on Earth, their goal is to make us turn on each other. Paranoia is a weapon, and if we let it take hold, it will destroy us long before we ever hear another word from that signal. We cannot give them that victory." He looked from one fearful, angry face to another, his plea hanging in the recycled air. "We are the only ones who know the truth of what is out there. If we fracture now, that truth dies with us." A fragile, tense truce settled over the Odyssey. It was not born of renewed trust, but of a cold, shared necessity. They were a lifeboat adrift in an infinite ocean, and the first person to start a fight would sink them all. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer the quiet of a journey, but the heavy, watchful silence of a standoff. The ship drifted in the unnerving quiet of real space, every creak of the hull a reminder of their vulnerability. It was Lena who broke the silence, her voice crackling over the ship-wide comm from her isolated lab. "I have found something else. It is faint, almost buried in the background radiation. But it is there." On the bridge, Aris and Eva watched as a new data stream, weak and fractured, appeared on the main viewer beside the pristine original signal. This one was different. It was a ghost, a distorted echo that seemed to bleed static and sorrow. Lena worked through the night, her face illuminated by the jagged lines of corrupted data. She filtered out the noise, layer by layer, chasing a pattern in the chaos. The translation was not a clean mathematical concept like the circle. It was a string of words, fragmented and ominous, as if ripped from a final, desperate broadcast. She read them aloud, her raspy voice giving weight to each chilling syllable. "Beware the silence, they listen." The words hung in the air, cold and absolute. They listen. It was not a statement about the origin of the original signal. It was a warning about a third party, an unseen audience to this cosmic conversation. Their mission was no longer a simple journey to meet a sender. They had stumbled into an unseen war or a hunt, and their every move was being watched. The simple quest for contact had just become a potential interstellar conflict, and they were the unwitting messengers walking straight into the crossfire. The void outside the viewport was no longer black. It churned with violet and crimson dust, a swirling, silent tempest that blotted out the stars. The nebula closed around the Odyssey like a fist, and the first impact was a violent shudder that threw them against their harnesses. Alarms screamed as the ship's external sensors went blind, their readings dissolving into a chaotic snow of meaningless data. On the engineering panel, warning lights flared red across the shield matrix. Engineer Ben Carter wrestled with the controls, his voice strained as he shouted over the groaning of the stressed hull. The particle density is overloading the forward deflectors. If we don't find a clear path in 10 minutes, we'll be torn apart. They were flying deaf and blind into a cosmic meat grinder, their technological edge rendered useless by the nebula's innate chaos. Every instinct screamed to reverse course, to flee back into the empty, predictable dark. But retreat was no longer an option. Their saboteur had seen to that. Their only path was forward through the storm. Aris stared not at the failing sensor displays, but at the one signal that remained perfectly clear amidst the madness. The original message, the dark signal from the other side of the universe. He remembered Lena's translation, the warning about being listened to, and a desperate, insane idea took root. What if the signal itself was the key? He isolated a faint, almost imperceptible energy signature he had previously dismissed as background noise, a subtle harmonic thread woven through the mathematical core of the message. It pulsed with a gentle, consistent rhythm, a quiet heartbeat in the storm of static. "Commander," he said, his voice cutting through the panic on the bridge. "I have a heading. It is a risk, a massive one. We follow the energy trail within the signal itself." Eva Rostova looked from Aris' determined face to Ben's desperate one, then to the churning, lethal beauty of the nebula on the screen. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it." Aris fed the coordinates into the crippled navigation system. The Odyssey turned, a wounded bird trusting a whisper in a hurricane. They plunged deeper into the crimson tendrils, the ship shuddering violently as it skirted impossibly close to gravitational eddies and lethal radiation spikes. For a long, agonizing minute, it seemed the gamble had failed. Then the violent shaking subsided. The sensor snow cleared, revealing a temporary, calm corridor through the storm, a hidden pathway the chaotic dust could not touch. They had not just found a safe route. They had proven the signal was more than a message. It was a map, a deliberate, pre-planned beacon left for anyone smart enough or desperate enough to follow its trail. The silence that had been listening now seemed to be guiding them, and the destination felt closer than ever. The calm corridor through the nebula felt more like a cage than a refuge. The silence was absolute, the churning chaos held at bay by a thread of energy they did not understand. On the Odyssey's bridge, that silence became a tangible weight, a question demanding an answer. "We cannot just listen forever," Lena stated, her voice cutting through the quiet. "We have to respond." The debate that followed was tense. A clash of scientific idealism against military pragmatism played out under the glow of the alien star field. Lena argued for a message of pure intellect. "We send them pi," she insisted, "the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. It is a constant, a universal truth any technological civilization would recognize. It is the next logical step from their circle. It says we understand and we are here." Commander Eva Rostova stood with her arms crossed, a statue of caution. "We do not know their intentions," she countered, her voice low and steady. That first signal was a handshake, Our reply could be heard as a declaration of war. What if pi is not a greeting to them? What if it is a trigger? We are operating with no rulebook, no context. One wrong symbol could be our last. The air grew thick with the unsaid fear. The memory of the saboteur and the dissolving scout, a grim reminder that humanity itself was not a unified voice. Aris listened to both sides, his gaze fixed on the main viewer where the original signal still pulsed, a silent siren call. He saw the wisdom in Eva's caution, the terrifying unknowns. But he also saw the profound opportunity in Lena's logic, the chance to truly join a conversation that had spanned the gulf between galaxies. He made the decision. "We did not come all this way to hide in the shadows," he said, his voice firm. "We answer, authorize the transmission, a simple, peaceful greeting, the mathematical constant pi, followed by a basic harmonic sequence representing our own biology, the unique resonant frequency of water." It was a handshake offered back into the dark. The moment the transmission left their array, a new, deeper silence fell over the bridge. It was the silence of anticipation, of a question hurled into an abyss. Every console, every sensor, every heartbeat was focused on a single, terrifying possibility. What happens when the abyss answers back? The silence after our transmission was a physical presence on the bridge, thick and heavy with a dread that tightened around every chest. Minutes stretched into an hour, the only sound the low hum of the ship and the frantic beating of our own hearts. Then, the comms console lit up with a priority alert, its soft chime deafening in the quiet. A new signal had arrived. It was not a mathematical constant or a simple shape. This was a torrent of data, a dense, spiraling code that resembled nothing so much as a genetic sequence. Lena isolated it, her fingers trembling as she fed it into the ship's bioscanners. The results resolved on the main viewer, a complex, three-dimensional model of a molecule twisting in the air. Her voice was a whisper of pure awe, cutting through the tension. They are not just talking. They are offering a part of themselves. It was a blueprint. A complete set of instructions for constructing a synthetic organism, an artifact of unimaginable alien biology. The wonder of the moment lasted for only a second before it shattered into conflict. Engineer Carter was the first to voice the fear gripping half the crew. "This is a Trojan horse," he stated flatly, his eyes fixed on the swirling model. "We synthesize this, and we could be building our own plague, a bioweapon designed to wipe us out the moment we activate it. We have no context for their motives, no frame of reference for their ethics. This could be a gift, or it could be the most sophisticated poison ever conceived." Commander Rostova stood with her arms crossed, her gaze shifting from the beautiful, dangerous blueprint to the faces of her crew. "The risk is incalculable," she agreed. "We are not just decoding a message anymore. We are being asked to perform an act of creation with a technology we cannot possibly comprehend. One misstep, one variable we do not understand, and we could unleash an extinction-level event on this ship, or worse, provide a backdoor for whatever is listening." But Aris saw something else in the intricate design. He saw an answer to the original circle, a leap of faith that mirrored their own. "They sent us a foundation," he argued, his voice rising with passion. "We sent them a constant. They have replied with the very architecture of life. This is not a weapon. A weapon would be a schematic for a bomb, a virus. This is a key. It is an invitation to understand them on a fundamental level. To refuse this is to refuse the entire purpose of our mission. We came here for contact, and they are offering us the ultimate handshake." The debate raged, a microcosm of humanity's oldest conflict between hope and fear, between the desire to reach out and the instinct to defend. The fate of first contact now hinged on a single, impossible decision. To build was to trust completely in an unknown intelligence. To refuse was to slam a door that had taken eons to open. In the heart of that silent ship, adrift between galaxies, a vote was taken that would change everything. The vote was not unanimous, but Aris held the authority. With a final, tense look at Eva's stony silence, he gave the order: initiate synthesis. In the sterile isolation of the biolab, printers hummed to life, assembling atoms according to the alien blueprint. For hours, nothing. Then, a single, perfect crystal began to form in the nutrient solution. It was not a gem, but something far more complex, its facets shifting and reconfiguring as it grew, emitting a soft, internal light that pulsed with a rhythm they all recognized. It was in perfect sync with the original dark signal, a tiny, beating heart born from its message. Engineer Ben Carter watched the data streams flowing between the crystal and the ship's computers, his earlier fear replaced by a hushed reverence. "It is not just alive," he whispered. "It is learning. It is parsing our systems, our linguistic databases. It is learning our language." The crystal's light intensified, and a simple, text-based query appeared on the main lab display, formed from the very words it had pulled from the Odyssey's own records. The question was stark, devoid of greeting or preamble. It was a fundamental demand for purpose. "Why are you here?" The air left the room. This was not the philosophical wonder of first contact. It was an interrogation. They had traveled across the universe to ask their own questions, and the first thing this new intelligence demanded was to know their intentions. Every fear, every hope, every division on the ship narrowed to this single, terrifying point. How they answered would define not just their mission, but perhaps the future of humanity itself. The silence on the bridge was absolute as the single, stark question hung in the air. "Why are you here?" Aris stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He spoke not to the console, but directly to the softly pulsing crystal. "We heard your call," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We came to learn who sent it." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the crystal flared with a light so brilliant it forced them to shield their eyes. When the glare faded, a new presence filled the lab. It was not a solid form, but a coalescence of light and sound, a shimmering holographic entity that hovered above the crystal. It had no face, no body, yet it conveyed a sense of immense age and profound sorrow. "You may call me Kalin," a voice resonated in their minds, smooth and ancient, devoid of a mouth to shape the words. "You have asked who we are. I will show you what remains." The lab dissolved around them. In an instant, they were no longer aboard the Odyssey. They stood on a ghostly plain under a sky of twin suns, one gold, one violet. Towering, crystalline cities spiraled towards the heavens, their structures singing with a gentle, harmonic energy. They saw Kalin's people, beings of light and intricate geometric form, living in a society of breathtaking beauty and advanced knowledge. "This was our home," Kalin's voice echoed through the vision. "We reached across the stars as you have begun to do. We sought conversation, communion. We believed the cosmos was a garden to be cultivated." The idyllic scene shattered. The violet sun began to dim, not from an eclipse, but from a swarm of something vast and dark moving between the stars. The vision shifted to a panicked view from orbit, showing ships that were not ships, but living, planet-sized organisms, ravenous and silent. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. "They are the Devourers," Kalin explained, the sorrow in its mental voice now a raw, bleeding wound. "Predators of a scale you cannot comprehend. They do not consume worlds for resources. They consume the light of consciousness itself. They hunt for intelligence, for the unique energy of a sentient race reaching for the stars." The holographic memory showed the crystalline cities going dark, one by one, their songs extinguished as the shadow fell upon them. The final image was not of destruction, but of a single, desperate act. A lone vessel, much like the Odyssey, launching a tightly focused data stream into the void, aimed at the one quiet, uninteresting sector of space, our own Milky Way. "Our signal was never a greeting," Kalin said, the vision collapsing back into the stark reality of the lab. It is a warning carved from the ashes of our civilization. A beacon screaming into the silence, not to invite contact, but to beg for silence. You must not broadcast your location. Your own radio waves, your early attempts at communication, are like flares in the darkness, drawing the hunter's eye. Every message you have ever sent is a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to your doorstep. The revelation of the Devourers hung in the air, a spectral threat made terrifyingly real. Then a proximity alert shattered the silence, its shrill tone a spike of pure adrenaline. The Odyssey's long-range sensor array had detected an energy surge, a flicker of impossible movement light years distant. The signature was a perfect match for the planet-sized predators from Kalin's dying memory. Commander Eva Ristova was a blur of motion, her voice a sharp, commanding crack that left no room for hesitation. All non-essential systems offline now, full stealth protocol. Kill the engines, dampen the heat signature, and for the love of Earth, shut down every transmitter. The ship plunged into an emergency darkness, the gentle hum of the reactors fading to an unnerving whisper. The only light came from the main viewer, where the sensor data painted a horrifying picture. The anomaly was not just a blip. It was awake, a distortion in spacetime itself, and it was moving. It was moving toward the last known source of a significant energy spike. The Odyssey's own faster-than-light arrival, and their subsequent reply to the signal. Engineer Carter confirmed their worst fear, his face pale in the dim console light. The surge is altering its trajectory, its course correcting, it is hunting, and we just rang the dinner bell. The realization was a cold knife in the gut. Their simple, hopeful message, their attempt to join a conversation, had been a catastrophic mistake. They were not just observers of a past tragedy. They were the current prey, and the hunter had just caught their scent on the interstellar wind. Every broadcast humanity had ever sent into the void, every television show, every deep space probe's farewell, was not a declaration of existence, but a trail of crumbs leading a cosmic wolf straight to their door. Kalin's form flickered, the light within it dimming as if burdened by the memory. The dark signal was our final act, a desperate message in a bottle cast into an ocean of silence. We did not send it to share knowledge, but to find allies, to find a species that had not yet been noticed, one that could be warned and perhaps one day could stand with us. But we are the last. There is no one else. Aris stared at the entity, the scientist in him wrestling with the human. He shook his head, a fierce defiance hardening his voice. We cannot hide forever. Cowering in the dark, afraid to speak, afraid to reach out, that is not a future. That is an extinction drawn out over centuries. We have to fight back. We have to find a way. Commander Eva Ristova stepped between Aris and the shimmering form of Kalin, her posture rigid with military pragmatism. Fight back with what, Aris? Our most powerful weapons are firecrackers against a storm. The Odyssey is a research vessel. We are explorers, not soldiers. Our duty is to return home with this warning, not to launch a suicidal crusade against a force that consumes civilizations. The debate was a chasm opening on the bridge, a fundamental split between the instinct to resist and the duty to survive. But the argument was cut short, severed by a violent, deafening impact that threw them from their feet. The ship groaned in protest, metal shrieking against forces it was never designed to withstand. The main viewer flickered, and a new proximity alert screamed into the chaos, its message terrifyingly simple. The Devourers were no longer a distant threat on a sensor screen. They were here, they were closing in. Metal screamed as the first energy blast tore through the Odyssey's outer hull. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the frantic crimson pulse of battle stations. On the main viewer, a shape resolved from the void, a jagged shard of darkness that seemed to absorb the surrounding starlight. It was a fraction of the size of the planet killers from Kalin's vision. but its malevolent purpose was just as clear. It was a scout. The ship shuddered again under a sustained volley, the sound of rending metal echoing through the corridors like a death rattle. Engineer Ben Carter slammed his hands on the engineering console, his face a mask of sweat and concentration. Shields are failing on decks 7 through 9. He began rerouting power, diverting life support and non-essential systems in a desperate gamble. A new alarm blared, a specific, chilling tone they had trained for but never hoped to hear. His voice cracked as he shouted over the din. "They are not just trying to destroy us. Their weapons fire is precise, targeting our airlocks and docking clamps. They are trying to board us." Panic threatened to seize the bridge, the abstract horror of the Devourers becoming a terrifyingly immediate physical threat. But Aris was not looking at the attacking ship. His eyes were locked on Kalin, the ancient entity now pulsing with a frantic, strobing light. "It is a lesser drone, a sensory limb of the whole." Kalin's voice resonated in their minds, strained and urgent. "It operates on a hive frequency, a single consciousness distributed across its form. It is its greatest strength and its only weakness, a cascade of data, concepts of alien physics and resonant harmonics, flooded Aris' mind. He understood. He stumbled to the tactical station, shoving a stunned crew member aside. His fingers flew across the interface, configuring the Odyssey's long-range communications array not to send a message, but to emit a focused, disruptive pulse. "Ben, I need all remaining power, everything we have, channeled to the main dish." Now, Ben didn't hesitate. He rerouted the last of the emergency reserves, the ship groaning as internal gravity failed and the air grew thin. Aris fed Kalin's data into the system, tuning the pulse to a specific, shattering frequency. He didn't target the scout's hull or its weapons, he aimed for its mind. He fired. There was no brilliant lance of energy, no spectacular explosion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the attacking ship seemed to convulse. Its precise, coordinated fire became a wild, erratic spray. It listed violently, its dark form flickering as if caught in a strobe light. With a final, silent shudder, it disengaged, vanishing back into the cloaking darkness of the nebula as quickly as it had appeared. The sudden silence on the bridge was more deafening than the battle. The Odyssey's damage control systems automatically lit up, displaying a horrifying schematic of the ship. Hull breaches on 3 decks, life support failing, the FTL drive a mangled ruin. They had survived the first skirmish, but they were now crippled, adrift in the hunting grounds of a predator that now knew exactly where they were. The victory against the scout ship left them floating in a tomb of their own making. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the bridge, illuminating the faces of a crew now grappling with their own survival. The air grew thin and cold, each breath a conscious effort. Commander Ristova's voice was a raw, steady command cutting through the gloom. "Seal decks 7 and 9. Reroute all remaining power to primary life support and structural integrity. We are not dead yet." Engineer Carter and a small team, suited up and tethered, ventured into the breached sections, their movements slow and deliberate in the weightless, airless dark. It was a grim, patchwork operation, welding plates over torn hull metal, and bypassing shattered conduits with whatever spare parts they could salvage. They were not making the Odyssey whole again, merely plugging the leaks in a sinking ship, buying themselves hours, maybe minutes, not days. In the relative safety of her lab, Lena Petrova ignored the groaning of the dying vessel around her. Her focus was absolute, consumed by the data Spike Aris had used to disable the attacker. In the chaotic aftermath, she had managed to capture a residual data fragment, a shred of the scout's own consciousness left behind in its panicked retreat. It was a corrupted, screaming thing, a log of a dying mind. She expected to find tactical schematics, weapon profiles, the cold logic of a predator. Instead, she found a memory. It was not a vision of conquest, but of a flight across an unimaginable abyss. A home galaxy not consumed but collapsing in on itself, its core stars winking out into a final, absolute nothingness. She saw the Devourers not as a unified, malevolent force, but as a refugee armada, an entire species packed into living ships, fleeing an end that chased them at the speed of light. Their consumption was not a choice, but a horrific necessity, a way to fuel their eternal exodus by draining the psychic energy, the very consciousness, of any other sentient life they encountered. They were not hunting for sport. They were harvesting to survive. Lena leaned back from her console, the cold of the ship seeping into her bones. She looked at the fractured, desperate images on her screen, then at the worried faces of the crew on the bridge monitor. Her voice was a soft, horrified murmur, barely audible over the straining life support, yet it carried the weight of a shattered universe. They are desperate, too. This is not a war of good and evil. It is a cycle of fear, one terrified species consuming another just to keep running from the dark. The simple clarity of their mission, the idea of humanity as the innocent prey, dissolved into a much more terrible and complicated truth. The air grew colder still, the thin atmosphere carrying the scent of ozone and something else, the faint, clean smell of shattered crystal. Kalin's light, once a steady pulse of ancient presence, now flared in frantic, painful bursts. The entity did not speak. Instead, a wave of pure, coherent energy flowed from its core, washing over the bridge consoles. The red emergency lights flickered, then steadied. The groaning of the stressed hull quieted to a low, manageable hum. Engineer Carter stared at his readouts in disbelief. We are getting power from an external source. Structural integrity fields are stabilizing. He looked up at the shimmering form, his face a mixture of awe and horror. You are giving us your own life force. Kalin's form began to fracture, thin, hairline cracks spreading across its luminous surface like a pane of glass under immense pressure. Its final message did not echo in their minds this time, but was spoken in a soft, synthesized voice through the ship's comms, a voice stripped of all emotion, yet carrying the weight of 1 billion lost souls. You must reach the source. My people's legacy awaits you there. Do not let fear dictate your future. With those words, a final, brilliant pulse of light erupted from the crystal, so bright it illuminated every corner of the darkened bridge. Then it was gone. Where Kalin had hovered, a fine, inert dust drifted slowly to the deck, glittering for a moment in the dim light before turning gray and still. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of dread or defeat, but a profound, terrible quiet born of sacrifice. They were alive because a being from a dead civilization had spent its last spark to keep them so. The warning was no longer an abstract data stream. It was a debt. Commander Ristova was the first to move, her voice low and resolute as she broke the stillness. Plot a course for the signal's origin point. Maximum sub-light speed. We are not running anymore. We are finishing this. The crew turned to their stations, their movements no longer frantic, but purposeful. The fear was still there, a cold stone in the gut, but it was now overshadowed by something stronger, something harder. They had been given a map, a warning, and now a final, sacred charge. The source of the dark signal was no longer a destination. It was a promise and a reckoning. The silence of deep space was a fragile thing, broken only by the strained hum of their patched-together systems. Then the star field ahead began to warp. It was not a violent distortion like their faster-than-light transit, but a gentle, deliberate bending of reality. A ring of shimmering silver energy, vast enough to swallow a moon, shimmered into existence. Within its circumference, the stars were not just streaking lights, but a swirling vortex of impossible colors, a tunnel punched through the fabric of the cosmos. This was Kalin's final coordinate, not a point in space, but a door. Aris' fingers flew across his console, his voice hushed with a reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. The energy signature is not natural. It is being generated, held open by technology so advanced it reads as magic. This ring is a bridge. He turned to face the crew, his eyes alight with a terrifying and wonderful realization. The dark signal was not just a warning or a message in a bottle. It was an invitation, a deliberate, pre-planned pathway left for us, or for anyone who could understand the call and survive the journey to its source. The greatest secret in the universe was waiting on the other side of that shimmering gateway. The debate that followed was short, brutal, and devoid of the earlier philosophical arguments. The fear was still there, a cold knot in every stomach, but it was now tempered by a grim, undeniable logic. Commander Ristova laid it out with stark clarity. We have no functional faster-than-light drive. Our hull is held together by hope and borrowed time. If we stay here, we are a stationary target, waiting for the next scout, or worse, the main body of the Devourer fleet to find us. Our only chance, our only possible path forward, is through that ring. Engineer Carter chimed in, his tone flat and factual. The energy readings are stable, far more stable than our own damaged systems. It is a smoother ride than what we have right here. The choice was an illusion. They were not choosing between safety and risk. They were choosing between certain death in the hunting grounds and an uncertain destiny on the other side of a bridge built by ghosts. Aris input the final course correction. The Odyssey, a wounded bird of human ingenuity, turned its nose toward the heart of the shimmering vortex. There was no countdown, no dramatic fanfare. The ship simply crossed the threshold, and the universe folded inside out. The transition was not a passage but a forgetting. One moment, the universe was a familiar tapestry of stars and void. The next, it was a single, silent thought suspended in a sea of impossible color. Then it was over. The Odyssey drifted into a new, profound stillness. Before them, blotting out the star-dusted black, hung a structure of such scale that the human mind rebelled against its comprehension. It was a sphere, its surface a mosaic of geometric patterns and dark, non-reflective metal, wrapped so perfectly around the cold, white husk of a dead star that it seemed to have grown there. It was a Dyson Sphere, a concept from their wildest theoretical physics, made terrifyingly real. This was the source of the dark signal, a tomb and a monument built around a corpse of fire. Lena's console chimed, a soft, insistent sound in the echoing quiet of the bridge. Her eyes widened as she parsed the faint energy signatures emanating from within the colossal shell. "It is not a power source," she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence usually reserved for holy places. "The readings are complex, layered. It is data." A library, an archive. She turned to the others, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her screen. Kalin did not just lead us to a warning, they led us to a vault. This sphere contains the cumulative knowledge of every civilization the Devourers have ever consumed. It is a record of 1 billion voices, preserved here at the end of all things. The implications unfolded in the silence, vast and terrifying. This was the ultimate treasure, the answer to every question humanity had ever asked about the cosmos. The history of galaxies, the secrets of physics, the art and philosophy of species long since turned to dust. It was all here, waiting, but it was also the ultimate bait. Aris stared at the silent, dark sphere, his scientist's heart warring with his instinct for survival. To access that archive is to activate a beacon far brighter than any signal we have ever sent. The Devourers are drawn to consciousness, to the energy of an active, learning mind. What do you think will happen if we switch on the greatest collection of knowledge in the known universe? The risk was astronomical. To learn, they would have to announce their presence with a shout that would echo across the void. Yet, to turn away from that knowledge, to let the legacy of countless races die unread in the dark, felt like a betrayal of everything they were, and everything Kalin had sacrificed. The choice was no longer about survival. It was about what they were willing to become. Were they mice, hiding in the walls of a silent cathedral, or were they scholars, ready to light a candle in the archives of the dead, knowing the light might also draw the executioner? The docking clamps engaged with a sound like a final, sealing tomb. A section of the sphere's impossibly smooth surface earized open, revealing a hangar bay of such vast, dark emptiness it felt less like a room and more like a swallowed piece of the void. The Odyssey drifted inside, a tiny seed in a cavernous, silent shell. As the outer door sealed behind them, the airlock of their own ship hissed, equalizing pressure with a ghost's breath. Then light bloomed from the very floor and walls, a soft, omnidirectional glow that illuminated the hangar in the color of a pale, remembered moon. A presence coalesced in the air before them, not a single form, but a shimmering, shifting tapestry of countless faces and shapes, a chorus of whispers given form. A voice spoke, a harmony of 1,000 different tones and languages, all woven into a single, comprehensible stream of thought that resonated within their own minds. "We are the echoes of those who came before." The voice was ancient, layered with the grief of extinct worlds and the quiet pride of a final, defiant act. The dark signal was our final warning, cast into the silence in the hope that a species with wisdom and with courage would one day understand its purpose. "You are the first to answer." The statement hung in the air, a monumental truth that settled upon the crew with the weight of epochs. They were not just visitors to a tomb. They were the inheritors of a legacy entrusted to them by the dead. This sphere was not merely a library. It was a sanctuary, a fortress of memory built by Kalin's civilization as their last act. A place to preserve the stories, the science, and the souls of every culture the Devourers had ever consumed, in the hope that someone, someday, could learn from their collective tragedy. The archive was not a passive record. It was a weapon forged from memory itself, and they were now its only keepers. The echoes shifted, the tapestry of faces dissolving into a single, harrowing vision. It was not a world of predatory design, but a paradise, a species of profound empathy, living in perfect symbiosis with their world. They felt the joy of every growing thing, the sorrow of every passing. Then their sun began to die. They faced a choice between extinction and a terrible salvation. A technology was forged, a psychic engine that could sustain their collective consciousness, but it required a horrific fuel. The empathy that had defined them, the very thing that allowed them to feel the pain of others, was the first thing they had to sever to power their escape. They sacrificed their soul to save their mind. The Devourers were not born monsters. They were refugees who had performed a cosmic self-mutilation, and now they wandered, eternally hungry, trying to fill a void their own technology had carved into them. Aris felt the truth settle in his bones, a cold, heavy certainty. "They are not evil," he whispered, the words carrying across the silent bridge. "They are broken. We have to find a way to break the cycle." The old human instincts, the ones that screamed for retaliation, for building bigger weapons, felt suddenly primitive and useless. You cannot win a war against a wound. You can only try to heal it. Commander Rostova, her soldier's heart wrestling with this new, alien reality, looked from the haunting vision to the determined faces of her crew. A peaceful solution against that. Her gesture took in the memory of the attacking scout, the planet-consuming swarms. It seems impossible, but Engineer Carter, the pragmatist, saw a different angle. "Every system has a failsafe," he said, his eyes scanning the echo's data streams. "Every machine has an off switch. What if their transformation wasn't perfect? What if a piece of what they were still remains buried deep within that hive mind? A flaw in the code, a ghost in the machine." The resolution did not come from a vote, but from a shared, dawning understanding. Confrontation would only continue the cycle, making them into another predator in the dark. But to offer a different path, to speak to the echo of the people they once were, that was a weapon the Devourers had never faced. It was a risk that dwarfed all others, a gamble on the last shred of light within an all-consuming dark. They would not fight the Devourers, they would try to wake them up. Aris stood before the shimmering tapestry of the echoes, the weight of a billion lost histories pressing upon him. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent hangar with the force of a new star igniting. We will not build a weapon. We will use the archive to broadcast a new signal, one of empathy. We will send them back their own memories, the truth of what they once were, before the fear and the hunger. We will show them they are not alone. Commander Eva Ristova stared at him, her arms crossed, a fortress of ingrained caution. You are risking everything, the entire human race, on a psychological theory. We have one ship, and you want to give a therapeutic broadcast to a force that consumes galaxies. It is the single most reckless proposal I have ever heard. But from beside a flickering console, Lena Petrova spoke. Her cynicism burned away in the light of the archive. The dark signal was a cry for help from a dying civilization, she said, her raspy voice firm. Maybe ours can be the answer. We have to try. It is the only move that is not a step in their cycle. It is the only thing they will not expect. The crew, their faces illuminated by the ghostly light of the echoes, looked from Aris' desperate hope to Eva's rigid pragmatism. The choice was no longer about command. It was about faith. One by one, they nodded. The engineer, the navigator, the medic. Their silent assent was a unanimous vote for a different kind of courage. They would not hide. They would not fight. They would speak with a voice forged from the sorrow of the entire cosmos, and hope that somewhere in the Devourers' hive mind, a forgotten ember of what they once were could still hear the music of their own past. The archive hummed with a new purpose, its ancient machinery awakening to a task its builders had only dreamed of. Aris and Lena stood at the central console, their hands moving through holographic streams of data, while the echoes swirled around them like benevolent ghosts. They were not just sending a message. They were weaving a tapestry of experience, stitching together the raw, emotional core of human history with the serene beauty of Kalin's lost civilization. They selected the courage of a first step onto the moon, the sorrow of a species watching its own world warm, the simple joy of a child's laughter. They intertwined it with Kalin's memories of cities that sang and a people who reached for the stars with open hands. This was not a signal of logic or mathematics. It was a symphony of feeling, a condensed wave of everything that made a civilization worth saving. Ben Carter watched the power conduits from his engineering station, his face grim. The energy required to broadcast this empathic torrent was staggering, drawing directly from the dead star at the sphere's heart. The entire structure began to thrum with a deep, resonant frequency. "Commander," he called out, his voice tight. "The power draw is catastrophic. This is not a whisper. This will light us up like a beacon. Every devourer in the sector will see us." He was right. On his screen, the localized void around the Dyson Sphere was no longer dark. It was blazing with a psychic signature more brilliant than a quasar, a lighthouse flare of pure consciousness screaming into the silent deep. They were not hiding in the archives anymore. They were standing on the roof, shouting their souls into the storm. There was no turning back. With a final, collective breath from the crew and a silent surge of hope from the echoes, Aris initiated the sequence. The empathy wave launched from the ancient transmitter, a ripple of pure feeling expanding outward at the speed of light, carrying the combined heart of two species into the hunting grounds. For a moment, there was only the echo of their own courage in the vast, silent hall. And then, from the darkness outside, 1,000 points of light began to turn in their direction. The void outside the sphere's shell began to boil. Space itself fractured, vomiting forth a swarm of jagged, planet-sized silhouettes that blotted out the star field. In moments, the armada was upon them, a cage of living warships surrounding the Dyson Sphere, their dark forms pulsing with a ravenous, silent hunger. A communication channel was forced open, and a voice devoid of warmth or inflection growled through the Odyssey's speakers. "You possess the echoes. Surrender the archive or be erased." The words were not a request, but a final statement of fact. The standoff had begun, and the stage was set not for a battle of fleets, but of wills. Commander Eva Ristova stood firm, her hands clenched at her sides. "We are not surrendering anything. This archive is a record of life, not a trophy for your consumption." Her defiance was a spark in the face of a hurricane. In response, a single Devourer vessel detached from the swarm, its forward weapons array glowing with a malevolent crimson light. It was not aiming at the Odyssey, but at a vulnerable-looking sector of the Dyson Sphere's outer shell. It was a demonstration, a promise of the annihilation to come. The message was clear. Their patience was a fiction. Their demand was absolute. They would shatter this tomb of memory and devour the light within, and they would start by crushing the insignificant life form that dared to stand in their way. The time for a signal, for a theory, was over. Now was the moment of truth, and the only thing left to offer was the one thing the Devourers had long forgotten they had ever possessed. A choice. Aris moved before anyone could stop him, his fingers flying across the comms panel to open a direct channel to the Devourer flagship. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the armada of nightmares waiting outside. "We will not surrender the echoes," he said, his words echoing in the tense silence of the bridge. "But we will offer you a gift, a memory." Before the massive warship could react, he rerouted the entire empathic broadcast, focusing its full, concentrated power into a single, targeted stream aimed directly at the command vessel. The Odyssey's systems whined in protest, but the transmission surged forward, a tsunami of pure, unfiltered feeling. It was not an attack, it was an offering. It carried the collective joy of Kalin's people watching their twin suns rise, the profound grief of a world seeing its star grow cold, the desperate love that fueled their final act of preservation. It carried humanity's own fragile hope, our fear of the dark, and our stubborn, beautiful refusal to surrender our voice to the silence. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only static from the comms channel. The Devourer fleet held its position, a cage of poised claws and glowing weapons, ready to shred the sphere and everyone in it. Then, the static cleared and a new voice emerged. It was the same commander, but the flat, robotic tone was gone, replaced by a rasping, fractured sound, like stone grinding against stone. The words that came were slow, heavy with the weight of eons. "We remember." The words hung in the air, a seismic shift in the fabric of reality itself. On the main viewer, the crimson glow from the lead ship's weapons array flickered and died. Across the swarm, one by one, the predatory lights of 1,000 warships began to wink out, their menacing hum fading into a profound and echoing quiet. The weapons were powering down, the hunt was over. The silence that followed was not the silence of the void or of death, but the deep, trembling quiet of a wound finally beginning to heal. The name Vorlag emerged from the comms speaker, a word that felt old, heavy with the dust of forgotten stars. Its voice, no longer a predatory growl but a raw, wounded thing, filled the Odyssey's bridge. "We lost our song long ago. Survival demanded a terrible price, and we paid it with our memories. We consumed to flee our own end, and in the endless running, we forgot what we were running from. We became the very thing we feared." The admittance was not an excuse, but a confession torn from the heart of a galaxy-spanning tragedy. "Your signal, it reminds us of what we were." The words hung in the air, a seismic shift in the history of the cosmos. This was not a surrender, but an awakening. A tentative ceasefire was offered, a fragile bridge of dialogue built over an abyss of consumed civilizations. The Devourer armada did not retreat, but its stance changed. The warships powered down their primary weapons, their menacing forms now looking less like claws and more like a mournful, silent vigil. They were not leaving. They were listening. For the first time in eons, they were remembering how to listen. The crew of the Odyssey watched, their own breath held, as the ancient enemy they had feared became something infinitely more complex. A patient in a hospital of their own making, finally looking down at the self-inflicted wound. The war was over, but a much more difficult task had just begun. The delicate work of helping a ghost remember how to live. The negotiations unfolded not in a sterile conference room, but in the vast, silent hall of the archive itself, the ghostly light of the echoes bearing witness. Aris spoke for humanity's curiosity, Eva for its pragmatism, and Vorlag for a people drowning in a forgotten past. The pact they forged was as unprecedented as the signal that brought them here. Humanity would act as a guide, using its unique perspective to help the Devourers carefully navigate the emotional torrent of the archive, to reclaim the memories they had sacrificed. In return, the vast armada would become a shield, protecting Earth and its fledgling colonies, while sharing the technological wonders gleaned from a million consumed worlds. Lena drafted the terms, her usually cynical fingers typing with a reverent slowness. She looked up from her screen, her gaze taking in the human crew, the shimmering echoes and the silent, waiting fleet beyond the shell. "This is not just peace," she noted, her voice a soft rasp in the immense quiet. "It is a new beginning for both our species." The agreement was not signed on paper, but sealed in the shared silence of a billion remembered souls. A historic alliance was born not from victory, but from a shared, profound understanding of loss, and a mutual, desperate hope for a different future. The silence of the archive was filled with a new kind of energy, a resonant hum of two ancient technologies, human and Vorlag, intertwining. Wires of spun crystal from the Dyson Sphere merged with the organic, pulsating conduits of the Devourer vessels, creating a single, planet-sized transmitter. Its purpose was not to warn or to flee, but to speak with a voice the universe had never heard before. Aris stood at the viewport, watching the colossal array power up, its structure glowing with a soft, amalgamated light of silver and deep blue. Beside him, the spectral form of the echoes pulsed in quiet approval. This new signal would not be carved from fear like the dark signal. It would be woven from hope, a complex tapestry of shared memories and future promises. It contained the mathematical elegance of Kalin's people, the raw, emotional history of humanity, and now the first, tentative recollections of the Devourers themselves. Their lost home, their original name, the terrible choice that shattered them. It was a story of fracture and the painful, courageous first steps toward becoming whole again. When the final sequence was loaded, Aris placed his hand on the console. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried across the bridge and into the minds of the waiting armada. Let this be a light in the darkness, not a warning. With his command, the transmitter flared to life. A wave of coherent information, more profound than any energy weapon, surged outward. It pulsed with the rhythm of a unified heartbeat, a declaration that isolation was a choice, and that a shared future was possible. This was the true end of humanity's lonely vigil in the cosmos, the moment we stopped being a solitary voice and became part of a galactic chorus. The old dark signal had been a cry for help from the edge of oblivion. This new message was an answer, and an invitation to any other lonely voice listening in the void, a promise that the silence did not have to be forever. The Odyssey turned its nose away from the archive's silent grandeur, the immense, sleeping armada of the Vorlag a new constellation in its wake. The journey home felt different, the ship no longer a lonely probe, but a vessel carrying the weight of a future yet to be written. In the main hangar bay, a section had been reconfigured, its atmosphere subtly altered to accommodate the Vorlag emissary, a single, crystalline node that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, a quiet piece of their collective consciousness sent to learn from humanity. Commander Eva Ristova stood at the viewport, watching the stars stream by, her reflection a ghost over the infinite dark. Her voice was quiet, meant for the crew around her and for herself. "We came out here looking for a message, and we are bringing back a new partner." The statement was simple, but it held the echo of their entire harrowing journey. They had left Earth as explorers of the unknown, seekers of a single truth. They were returning as diplomats for an entire galaxy. Their cargo hold empty of weapons but filled with the most dangerous and beautiful thing of all, a chance. The mission was no longer about what they could learn, but about what they could build. The course was set, the coordinates for Earth locked in. But as the ship surged forward, every member of the crew understood that they were not returning to the same world they had left. They had been changed, scarred, and enlightened by the truths of the cosmos. They carried a warning that had become an opportunity, a story of extinction that had transformed into a promise of alliance. The silence ahead was not the empty void they had first crossed. It was now a space filled with potential, humming with the whispered beginnings of a conversation that would redefine humanity's place among the stars. The blue marble of Earth filled the main viewer, a sight that should have felt like a homecoming. Instead, it felt like approaching a stage. The space around their homeworld was no longer the quiet frontier they had left. It swarmed with ships, military patrols, civilian cruisers, and a dense cloud of media drones, their camera lenses glinting like 1,000 watching eyes. A priority channel opened, and Admiral Vance's face appeared. The stern lines of his features softened by something Aris had never seen there before. Pure, unvarnished awe. "You have changed the game, Aris," the Admiral said, his voice thick with emotion. "The entire world is watching. They have been for weeks. The Odyssey's final transmission, the raw data packet containing the full record of their journey and the Vorlag Pact, had preceded them, igniting a firestorm of global reaction. Cheers and parades, political panic, and a deep, planetary soul-searching had rippled across every nation. For the crew, the harrowing journey through the Nebula and the confrontation at the Archive were over. But as Aris looked from the Admiral's stunned face to the teeming orbital traffic, he felt the weight of their true mission settle upon his shoulders. The real work was only just beginning. The discovery was over. Now came the far more difficult task of integration. How do you explain to a species that believed it was alone that it must now grow up? How do you teach a world used to being the center of its own story that it is one voice in a chorus, with a responsibility not just to itself, but to the silent, watching cosmos? The quiet of the bridge was filled with the hum of the ship and the silent, daunting echo of that single, monumental question. The chamber of the Global Council was a cavern of polished stone and simmering anxiety. Every screen on Earth seemed to be projected onto the vast, circular wall, a mosaic of billions of faces watching the man who had stepped out of a science fiction story and into their reality. Aris Thorne stood at the center, a lone figure before the assembled power of his species. He did not present charts or complex data streams. He simply began to speak, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "We are not alone, and we must not be afraid." The simple statement landed not as a revelation but as a challenge to the core of human nature. He spoke of the dark signal, not as a threat, but as a lesson carved from cosmic history. "Fear created the dark signal," he continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the Council. "It was the final scream of a civilization that believed isolation was its only defense. But courage answered it. Our courage, yes, but more importantly, the courage of the Vorlag to remember what they had lost." He painted a picture not of a terrifying armada, but of a people so scarred by their own survival that they had forgotten how to live. He described the Archive not as a weapon to be coveted, but as a hospital for the soul of a galaxy. "An alliance with them is not a surrender of our sovereignty," he argued. "It is an acceptance of our maturity. For the first time in our history, we are being offered a place in a community larger than ourselves. We can choose to be the species that hides in its own shadow, building bigger walls against the dark, or we can be the species that helps to turn on the lights. He paused, letting the weight of the choice settle in the room. The old path leads only to the silence we feared. This new path, the one built on the courage to understand rather than the instinct to destroy, leads to everything. The silence that followed was not one of disagreement, but of profound re-evaluation. A new directive was born in that chamber, not whispered in secret like Operation Silent Reach, but declared to all of humanity. The age of silent, fearful listening was over. A new era of open, cooperative exploration had begun, founded not on the dream of conquest, but on the promise of shared healing. The ripple from that dark signal had finally reached shore, and it was quietly, irrevocably changing the world. The lunar dust was a fine, gray powder beneath his boots, undisturbed for eons. Aris stood alone in the newly consecrated Tranquility Memorial, a dome of clear diamondoid overlooking the exact spot where his solitary vigil had first been broken by the dark signal. At its center, resting on a simple pedestal of lunar basalt, was all that remained of Kalin, a small, inert pile of crystalline dust, glittering faintly in the unfiltered sunlight. The bustling earth hung in the black sky above, a vibrant jewel whose future had been irrevocably altered by the sacrifice of this ancient stranger. He reached out, his gloved fingers hovering just above the dust, as if he could feel the echo of the immense life that had once burned there. The silence here was different from the crushing silence of deep space. This was a quiet of reverence, of a debt that could never be fully repaid. "Your warning saved us," he whispered, the words swallowed by the absolute vacuum, but your hope saved them. "Thank you." In that moment, the frantic chase through the nebula, the terror of the standoff, the weight of galactic politics, it all settled into a profound and personal peace. The ghost that had haunted his drive for answers was finally laid to rest. He had not just been a scientist seeking a source. He had been a student, and Kalin his final, greatest teacher. Turning from the memorial, Aris looked back at Earth, now crisscrossed with the new, faster-than-light lanes of Vorlag-assisted ships. His purpose was no longer about discovery. It was about stewardship. The warning was heeded. Now, the hope had to be nurtured. He was not returning to his old life of data and solitude. He was walking into a new one, tasked with ensuring that humanity's voice in the cosmic chorus would be one of wisdom, a legacy worthy of the sacrifice that had made it possible. The polished decks of the Odyssey no longer smelled of ozone and fear, but of clean air and the faint, odd whispers of schoolchildren. Aris Thorne, his hair now more silver than black, moved slowly through the ship that had been his home and his crucible. He trailed behind a tour group of fresh-faced cadets, their crisp blue uniforms a stark contrast to the worn, functional jumpsuits he remembered. They touched the sealed breach on Deck 7 with reverent fingers and stared at the empty space in the lab where a crystal had once pulsed with an alien soul. One cadet, a young woman with fierce, curious eyes, lingered after the group had moved on. She looked from the main view screen, now displaying a tranquil star field, back to Aris. "Sir," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "With all due respect, was it worth it? The risk was so absolute." Aris studied her face, seeing in it the same burning need to understand that had once driven him into the silence. He did not speak of galactic alliances or quantum physics. He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that softened the lines of his face. "The greatest risk," he said gently, "is never reaching out at all." The dark signal taught us that fear builds taller walls, but it never builds a better future. We were so afraid of what might be in the dark that we almost missed the chance to find a friend there. He gestured to the ship around them, this relic now serving as a classroom. This vessel carried us into the unknown, not because we were certain of what we would find, but because we were certain that staying silent was a slower, more certain kind of end. Your generation will not travel into the same silence we did. You will go out into a universe that is already speaking, already waiting. Your mission is not to find a signal, but to continue the conversation we were brave enough to start." The cadet nodded, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. The torch was not being passed with a grand speech or a formal ceremony, but in this quiet moment between the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future. The Odyssey was no longer just a museum piece. It was a compass, and its needle now pointed forever outward, toward the shared destiny written in the stars. The joint outpost hummed with a sound never before heard in the universe. A low, resonant chord born from the merger of human engineering and Vorlag biotechnology. It floated like a delicate silver seed pod tethered to the immense, dark shell of the archive, a bridge between two histories. Inside, Lena Petrova and Ben Carter worked alongside their new colleagues, beings of shimmering light and intricate crystalline form. They were no longer decoding warnings from the dead, but building a future with the redeemed. Ben monitored the outpost's unique power grid, a system that fed on the latent energy of the dormant star while carefully siphoning minute, non-invasive psychic resonance from the Vorlag scientists. "It is stable," he reported, a note of quiet triumph in his voice. "The integration is seamless. Their technology does not just work with ours, it complements it, like two different instruments finding harmony in the same song." Across the lab, Lena was immersed in a river of data, the combined knowledge of two species flowing through her console. Her work was no longer one of desperate translation, but of deliberate, open-ended research. It was during a routine calibration of the outpost's powerful new sensor array, a dish woven from spun human metal and Vorlag neural tissue, that a new alert chimed. It was not the blaring alarm of the original dark signal, but a soft, persistent ping, like a single, distant raindrop hitting a vast pond. She isolated the frequency, her breath catching in her throat. It was faint, incredibly so, weaker than humanity's earliest radio broadcasts. But it was there, a structured, repeating pattern of mathematical constants emerging from a galaxy so far away its light was barely a memory. Ben joined her, his pragmatic engineer's mind quickly assessing the impossible distance. The energy required to send a coherent signal across that gulf. It is beyond anything we or the Vorlag have ever conceived. What kind of civilization could project its voice so far? Lena did not answer immediately. She stared at the delicate, flickering line of data on her screen, a new thread in the tapestry of the cosmos. She thought of the fear that had once defined their mission, the terror of the unknown. She thought of the sacrifice that had broken a cycle of consumption, and the alliance that had been born from understanding. A slow, wondrous smile touched her lips. The cynicism of her old life completely burned away in the light of this new discovery. She finally spoke, her voice a soft, awed whisper that carried through the quiet lab and seemed to hang in the air forever. The conversation is just beginning. The crisp pages of the memoir felt heavy in his hands, the scent of ink, and binding a stark contrast to the sterile air of the lunar observatory where it all began. Aris Thorne had titled it simply "The First Word," a testament to the conversation he had helped to start. In the final chapter, his pen had paused over a single, definitive sentence. The dark signal was not an end, but a beginning. It reminded us that in the vast silence of space, our greatest strength is not our technology, nor our ambition, but our ability to listen and understand. These words became the cornerstone of his legacy, not as the man who decoded an alien message, but as the architect of a new philosophy for an interstellar age. He was no longer just a scientist, but a pioneer of a peace built on empathy, a concept that now echoed in school curriculums and diplomatic summits across the globe. The book was not a chronicle of fear, but a blueprint for courage, a detailed map of the journey from paranoid isolation to hopeful community. It taught an entire generation that the universe was not a dark forest full of threats. but a library full of stories waiting to be shared. His legacy was cemented not in a statue, but in the very fabric of human thought, a quiet assurance that our future among the stars would be guided by the wisdom of a past we had almost been too afraid to hear. The shipyard orbiting Jupiter was a cathedral of human ambition, its skeletal frameworks silhouetted against the swirling, tempestuous face of the gas giant. Within its central dry dock, the new vessel took shape. It was not a needle of war or a stealthy probe, but something entirely new. Its lines were graceful and open, its hull a mosaic of human titanium and the strange, non-reflective metals salvaged from the archive. They named it the Kalin. In a ceremony broadcast across the solar system, Commander Eva Rostova accepted her new rank and her new command. She stood on the Kalin's bridge, no longer facing a handful of terrified specialists, but a diverse crew of scientists, diplomats, linguists, and engineers. She looked at their faces, young and old, from every corner of Earth, and saw not the fear of the unknown, but a quiet, determined curiosity. "Our mission is no longer to find answers," she told them, her voice clear and carrying through the silent, expectant deck, "but to build bridges." The statement was a seismic shift in purpose, a line drawn forever between the old humanity and the new. The Odyssey had been a question hurled into the dark. The Kalin was an outstretched hand. Its first diplomatic voyage was not to a mysterious signal, but to a pre-arranged coordinates, a meeting with a Vorlag envoy ship to jointly investigate a stellar nursery. This was the new normal, the practical application of a galactic peace. They were no longer lone explorers, but participants in a shared stewardship of the cosmos, their every journey a silent declaration that the universe was not a territory to be claimed, but a community to be joined. The Lunar Institute's main hall was a hemisphere of pure, dark glass, open to the silent, star-dusted sky. At its center, Aris Thorne stood before a holographic representation of the galaxy, a swirling pinwheel of light. A single, gentle wave of soft blue was expanding from a point near its edge, washing over star systems in a slow, relentless tide. This was the empathy wave, the eternal broadcast from the Dyson Sphere. He watched it pulse, a heartbeat for the entire cosmos, and his voice was a quiet murmur in the vast, quiet space. "Every star now carries our message of hope. The dark signal has been redeemed." It was no longer a scream of warning from a dying race. It had been transformed into a symphony of shared memory, a testament that the darkest silence could be filled with light. The legacy of their journey was no longer a story confined to history books. It was a living, breathing signal, a gift sent forward through time, destined to endure for eons. Each new star system it touched was a potential friend, a future partner in the great, unfolding conversation. The fear that had once defined humanity's relationship with the void had been systematically dismantled and replaced with this gentle, persistent offering. Aris knew they would not live to see all the replies, to meet every civilization that might one day hear this song and answer back. But that was the point of a true legacy. You plant a tree whose shade you know you will never sit under. You send a message whose full meaning will only be understood by generations you will never meet. The broadcast was their tree, a cosmic oak grown from the seed of a single, desperate signal, and its roots were now deep enough to outlive them all. The star field above the Lunar Institute was no longer a map of distant, unknowable points. It was a neighborhood. Aris Thorne stood beneath that vast, dark dome, his hands in his pockets, and felt the weight of the old silence lift from his shoulders. He remembered the cold dread of that first alarm, the frantic scramble to understand a threat from the void. That fear, so primal and all-consuming, had been the starting pistol for a race against an imagined enemy. Yet here he stood in the quiet aftermath, and the greatest discovery was not of a monster, but of a mirror. The cosmos had reflected their own fears back at them, and then offered them a chance to see past them. The conflict that nearly shattered his crew had forged a bond stronger than any alloy, and the cooperation born from desperation had blossomed into an alliance that now spanned light years. A single dark signal had not brought a warning of destruction, but a lesson in empathy. It taught them that the universe was not a cold, empty arena for survival of the fittest, but a vast, interconnected network where the strongest trait was not aggression, but understanding. He looked up at the shimmering band of the Milky Way, and for the first time it did not feel like a barrier. It felt like a highway, a river of stars teeming with potential friends and future partners. The fear of being alone had been the cage humanity did not even know it was living in. Now the door was open, and the path ahead was lit by the combined light of 1,000 different suns. Aris smiled, a quiet, private thing meant for the stars themselves, and he whispered the two sentences that held the entire truth of their journey. We are not alone, and we are better for it. The words hung in the thin lunar air, a final, gentle answer to the dark signal's first, terrifying question. The story of the Odyssey and its crew was over, but their legacy was a prologue. Humanity's greatest adventures, the ones built on wisdom and shared wonder, were only just beginning.